of Jofa since I was 12 years old and had my bat mitzvah in women's tefillah at the Hebrew Institute of Riverdale. And I currently live in Cambridge and am married to my husband, Sam, for 11 years. And I work for the Wexner Israel Foundation. I work for the Wexner Foundation at Harvard running their Israel programs. And I'm really thrilled that Laura Weissman is here with us today. She's zooming in from Israel, though is normally based in Orange County, California. She and her Breslover husband, Lee, are both baalei tshuva. And together they are not only on a path of Jewish learning, but also, like most couples, on a path of learning about how to be in relationship with one another. And because we're all learning that, since we weren't actually taught it as a hard skill at any point in our life. And it's one of the really crucial skills in life. And it's unfortunate that we're not taught it and that we learn it on the go in different ways. And Laura teaches these skills to couples and to counselors in her practice, Psyched About Love. And through workshops and webinars, she bases her teaching on years of education and practice in the field of relationships. So we all have so much to learn, no matter where we are in a stage in a relationship. So let's do some learning together. And I want to turn it over to you, Laura.
Thanks, Alicia. Your point about learning these skills on the fly is so spot on. Sadly, they're not taught as hard skills. And so what we learn is what's caught more than what's taught. And many of us did not grow up with the greatest role models for relationships. So there are some very concrete steps that we can take to, one, understand ourselves better and our partners better, and really get over some of the obstacles and the hurdles that get in our way to the connection that we're all really seeking.
Great. So if you want to start us off with further thoughts than that.
Sure.
Some questions and just like your greatest hits, best advice from your years of practice.
So first of all, let me talk a little bit about the whole crossing the narrow bridge thing. And there's a very popular song that kind of misquotes one of Rabbi Nachman's teachings, that the whole world is a very narrow bridge. And the song says, but the main thing is to not be afraid. In actuality, what Rabbi Nachman actually said was to not scare yourself. The whole world's a very narrow bridge, but the main thing is lo lehitfached, not to scare yourself. And oftentimes what comes up in relationships is exactly that we're faced with a certain situation, and based on our life experience, what we perceive as reality in our world, we think a certain way about it. We assign a certain way of thinking about it. And that thinking scares us. My husband did this because what he really thinks is that, or my wife does this because we scare ourselves. And so the way to overcome that is to, one, become aware that you're doing it. And second, to use that bridge for connection rather than fear. So, like I said, our world is very different, right? Based on my experiences, my perceptions. And so if I might be thinking that something is going on in my husband's world that I don't understand, rather than presuming it, best to check it out and to let him know how I'm feeling. So I'm going to invite him, and I'm going to let him know, when you said X, Y, and Z, I really felt. What came up for me was. Then I'm not making you statements. I'm not putting him on the defensive. I'm just inviting him to explore my reality, which doesn't mean it's the reality. It means it's my reality. And the presumption is we want to connect. So we cross the bridge. Excuse me, one moment. Okay. So the different perceptions create the fear. And part of that, so the talk is Rabbi Nachman and Chassidic teaching and attachment. So why fear out of different realities and different perspectives? Because when we're an infant, from the very first moment we're born through about the first 18 months of life, the fastest part of our brain that's growing is the limbic system. And that is an emotional brain, and that begins to understand all the nonverbal communication and to read mommy's face. And the reason that's so important is I want mommy to come online with me, right? I want to know that when I go goo goo gaga, that's a good thing. Oh, that smile, that means like we're connected and we're doing that dance of connection, and that's a really good thing. And she loves me. But oh my gosh, if you've ever seen somebody scowl at a baby, like their whole little face melts, their whole being kind of crumbles, because that's terror. What happens if mom and baby don't connect? You know, baby's going to get left out in the snow and the wolves are going to eat it. Does the baby know that? Of course not. Does our creator know that? Absolutely. That's our survival, right? So the very, very first connection that we have to make is with mom. And so we're always yearning for that connection. As we grow, it's with our friends and with our communities and with our synagogues and in gangs and clubs and groups. We're seeking tribes. We're seeking connection because we've got safety in number. Okay. So we are hardwired for connection, but we're also hardwired to survive. And so connection is survival. But if I perceive threat, and here's the perception part, if I perceive threat, then my brain flips out of my nice intellectual frontal lobes that make me a thinking and a reasoning person, and they flip me into my reptilian brain, because that's all an alligator or reptile knows how to do, is fight, flight, or freeze. So if you have a different opinion than me, Alicia, like how is that a threat? Well, it's that disconnection thing. If you think you're right, that must mean that I am wrong, right? And that's not true, but that's really the way we feel about it. And so we do this dance. It's like this life and death kind of thing. No, you can't be right. I'm right. Because again, if you're right, that means I'm wrong. And that's disconnection. And that's terrifying. So if you still think that you're right, then I have to give you more information to explain to you why I'm actually right. Because if I'm right, then you will stay in connection with me. If I'm wrong, I'm back out in the snow and the wolves again, right? So when we spoke before, I think I gave you the example of the dress that broke the internet from a few years ago. And just for whoever's watching, that was really an amazing example of this whole thing of how important it is to be right, where there was a completely non-famous person, not a celebrity, at a wedding wearing a non-designer dress that somebody took a picture of, and some people saw it as blue and some people saw it as gold. And you would think people would go, wow, that's really interesting. That's a trip. Really? You see it's blue? Okay. But they didn't react like that. The world went nuts. From celebrities to one head of state of which country, I don't remember, but you can Google it and find out. They were cursing at each other. I'm right. And basically the story was completely irrelevant, because truly, who cares whether it's blue or gold, right? Who cares? What was relevant is I'm right. They're screaming at each other. The rest of the story didn't matter. They could have been, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. No, I'm right. Because I have to be. Because the consequences get really scary. So that's the first thing we want to do. We want to cross that narrow bridge into our partner's world. We want to explore what's going on. We want to find out what their reality is. And it doesn't make me wrong. We can both absolutely be right. But once we are in that place of not a survival dance, when we're in connection, we can let go of all that survival stuff and we can let somebody else be right while at the same time we're respecting our own realities. Okay. So that's on one foot kind of a primer.
Yeah. I mean, I love the way that you combine all of your psychological training and your knowledge of science with your Chassidic and Jewish learning and background, and I see how you apply it to the way you think about relationships for yourself and the way that you coach other people. So when you start to differentiate some of that for people who are earlier in relationships versus later in relationships, how do you see some of these different things coming up? What are the different skills that you feel like are important to think about in those different stages? Are there issues that like just never go away for people, like I might say sometimes in my own relationship, or are there things that really are newer at different stages? And how do you
So those are kind of like a bunch of questions rolled up into one. So let me see if I can break them down. There are definitely different stages of relationship. That first stage of relationship, that romance stage, when all the neurochemicals are conspiring to get you to connect, right? You've got all of those happy hormones running through your body going, oh my gosh, this is love and this is bliss. And it's wonderful. And then say you get into a committed relationship, you get married, and you move into kind of a power struggle. And it's very sneaky. It's not so obvious that that's what's happening, but it's that struggle for rightness, to know that you exist. And you become engaged and kind of locked into this thing where you can no longer blissfully cross the bridge into your partner's world and accept everything they're saying. You start playing out some of your own family stuff, your own childhood stuff. Because the theory that I use is an imago theory by Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt, which basically says that your beshert is not the one with whom you are going to live happily ever after. Your beshert is the one that will bring up all of your childhood stuff to allow you to go back and heal it. So sometimes when you are most frustrated with your partner, and I, as a therapist, would say, so those feelings of X, Y, and Z, what do they remind you of from your past? Who do they remind you of from your past? And they're like, oh, that's totally my mother. Oh my gosh, that was my father. Oh my gosh, right? It's like, yeah, of course it is. But when the two of you met, it felt like, wow, this is wonderful. It's bliss. I feel like I've known you my whole life, because of course you have. Right? We have different kinds of memory. We have implicit memory and explicit memory, and explicit is you remember the dates and the times and the faces and the places, but implicit are just these memories that even are pre-verbal, that it's just the memory of something that happened, and our partner comes along and does something that lays down right over the template of something of our past, and the brain goes, oh, I know this situation. This is danger, 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 right? So let's say husband's being really good, quote unquote, and he loads the dishwasher, right? And he's like, yeah, I'm great. And the wife comes in and he's expecting, oh, she's going to be so pleased. Like, I helped out. She's busy. I loaded the dishwasher. And she's like, seriously? This is where you put the dishes? Like, how many times have I told you this is not where the dishes go? And in that moment, like, number one, he's disappointed because it is not the reaction that he expected. But let's say his mom was hypercritical, right? And everything had to be just a certain way. And if not, it was never good enough. And he could never feel good enough. And so in that moment, that template lays right down over mom. And he's not talking to his wife anymore. He's talking to his mom, and that he can get really reactive. So one of the other first skill sets that I'm teaching to my clients is to be aware of their reactivity. To absolutely take responsibility for their own reactivity and not blame their partner. One of my favorite examples of that is Avram, right? So he had some really big challenges in his life, but the day that he's supposed to climb a mountain, sacrifice his son, get stopped by the angel, comes down the mountain, finds out his wife is dead, has to bury his wife, goes to bargain for a cave, and this guy's messing around with him, right? He's like, nah, what's a cave? Go ahead, take it. We're friends. And he's like, no, give me a price. It's like, no, really, just take the whole cave. No, seriously, just give me a price. Okay, fine. Like, it's worth like 5 million, but what's 5 million between friends? He's like, fine, with all these witnesses, I'll pay you 5 million. Now, I don't know about you, Alicia, but my reaction in that situation, if I was really clear that somebody was just messing around with me and trying to manipulate for their own agenda, I would be, are you kidding me? Do you have any idea what day I had? And I would probably just lose my mind, right? And I would go, I have this and I have that. And now you're trying to, he didn't. Like, he had this grace and this class and this self-regulation, because Avram knew who he wanted to be in this world. And in this world, he did not want to be a man who could be provoked into anger by anybody else, because he was aware that that was his trait to take care of. What we normally do is, if you do something to make me angry, you did it. And therefore I can go off on you, and I'm legit in going off on you, and I'm validated in going off on you because it's your fault. Because if you weren't such a who knows what, then I wouldn't be angry. It doesn't fly. It absolutely doesn't fly. So very first step is knowing that your anger, your triggers are yours, and create some space and do what you need to do to come back into regulation and figure out what's really running under that. Because oftentimes it's fear and it's shame. But if you're just reacting like an alligator, you're never going to get to that, and you're not going to be able to share that with your partner.
And anything that you see like further down into the power struggle that you're describing, or you think that's just the repetitive pattern that people have to continuously battle with?
No, this crossing the bridge is certainly way out of it. And one of the things you asked is, do you keep battling the same thing, your own same stuff? Based on personal experience, I think the answer is yes. But I think it's to much lessening degrees, right? Whatever we come through childhood with, those first woundings, the way they get lodged in our neurobiology, they are powerfully strong. And at some point, you're going to laugh with your husband, or vice versa, and you're going to say, all right, there it is again. There it is. You'll be able to recognize it. You become aware of what that program running in the background is. But until you start paying attention, it's just running in the background and you have no idea what's going on. You just know that he or she has pissed me off again. So your awareness grows. Your ability to deal with it grows. Your ease in inviting your partner to cross the bridge, and your partner's ease in crossing the bridge, knowing that it's not about them. Because oftentimes what happens is, they might say those magic words, Alicia, I'd like to have a dialogue with you, which is kind of code for, we're going to have a very formatted type of dialogue where I'm just going to talk and tell you about my experience. I'm not going to use any you statements whatsoever. I'm not going to tell you a story, because we both know the story already, right? You know it from your perspective. I know it from my perspective. So I'm going to fill you in on what you don't know. And what you don't know is how it landed on me, what my experience of it was, the meaning that I gave it. And just like the blue and the gold dress, you're just going to go, oh, okay. So this is how you saw it. Okay. Doesn't make it fact. It just means I care about you. So I want to know how it was for you. So it lessens. And you become aware of these adaptations that worked really well as kids to allow you to survive, but you bring them into adulthood, they don't work so well anymore. They're not your authentic self, and they become so strong you're not even aware that it's not really who you are. Some people who had to kind of hide out in their childhood, they become, well, I've always been kind of an introvert. Well, no, not really. But when you found your safety by hiding away, then you become an introvert. But maybe it's not necessarily so. So it does lessen. That's the good news with awareness.
So you're talking about all these tools that you can use to cross the bridge of understanding with someone else. But you're talking about it also from places of kind of more the calm after the storm of how do I sit and ask for dialogue, or how do I express myself? What are the tips you have for people to employ, like while they're in the heat of the moment, while they're feeling stuck, or they're feeling isolated, or they're feeling really upset about something? Where do the skills come in there in terms of crossing the bridge?
Okay. So the very first skill is to stop. My husband was at like a world marketplace, and he saw this little stick figure thing, and it had like a dinosaur head. And if you bang it against the table, the head all lights up and sparks. And I love it because it's such a beautiful example of what the reptilian brain does. It just goes, and when that happens, you're not there anymore. It's Mr. Alligator. There are functional MRIs that can see the activity in the brain and see what's lighting up. And when the reptilian brain is triggered, there's kind of like nothing else going on in the brain. It's this big massive gray with this one area firing, because that's the priority. I have to survive. Fight, flight, or freeze, and freeze is a shutdown and shutting out. And so stop, because there's nobody there. Once you notice you are triggered, as soon as you notice you are triggered, as soon as you notice your partner is triggered, just stop, because there's nobody there. The most challenging part of that, though, is it feels like abandonment. And now you're back to being that infant again. Abandonment is a life and death thing. So it can be in the heat of an argument. And let's say it's the guy. The guy is trying to be the good guy. And he doesn't want to say something he's going to regret. So he's going to leave. This is classic. And the woman chases after him, yelling and screaming, and I'm going to say baiting, because she doesn't want to be abandoned. Because as long as he's turning around and answering back, even if he's fighting back, he's still there and definitely connected with her. But if he walks out the door, he's disconnected. So the biggest challenge in just stopping is that fear of abandonment. So you want to talk about it from a calm place, and you want to talk about what your strategies are, and you want to talk about coming up with a code that, one time something happened with my husband, and he said something, and I stood up and I went, oh, alligator out of the cage. It was just like there was no more conversation going to happen, because in that moment I just lost it. But then you take the time, and I use a technique called emotional freedom technique, or EFT, not to be confused with Sue Johnson's EFT, which is emotional. I don't remember. Sue Johnson, attachment, also a couples therapist, but the tapping solution, if you Google that, there are a lot of free resources on how to use this very simple method to kind of help you get to that program that's running in the background. Because once you can figure it out, there's this huge aha moment, and then you can address that. But most of the time, you don't even know what triggered you. So I think those are probably the two key things for when you're in the heat of it, is stop. And I know that it's possible, because a skill that I learned from Heidi Schleifer, who's a master couples therapist, runs magnificent couples workshops and trains other therapists, is that only once will she allow a couple to have a fight in her office. Because normally, why replicate in your office what you do at home? Like, you don't need to come see a therapist for that. And she'll say, okay, go. And she doesn't really care what they're arguing about. And one of the things that it does is, after a very precise amount of time, she says, I'm going to say stop. And as soon as I say stop, you can be in the middle of a word, middle of a sentence, just stop. And so, in addition to many other things, which I won't get into, that it illustrates for the couple, it also illustrates the ability that they can, in fact, stop. So then once they take that space, they get some clarity, they figure out what that program is that's running in the background, then one of them says to the other, I'd like to have a dialogue. Is now a good time? And the reason that that is so safe is because of this dialogue that Harville Hendricks and Helen Hunt came up with in Imago Therapy, is that it's very prescripted, it's very scripted. So it's a very tight little box. And, in prayer, we're actually used to very specific dialogues and using certain things to get us where we want to go. But we know that there's a safety, because if you invite me to cross the bridge, you're going to tell me what your experience is, and I'm just going to reflect it. And then I'm going to summarize it. And then I'm going to validate your perspective. And at the end, most often you're going to go, because you feel heard. Your partner doesn't have to fix it. Your partner doesn't have to apologize. Your partner just has to hang out with you in your world, right? And so it creates this amazing safety that you can do this. And it keeps you out of that survival dance. You know, the whole perspective thing and the dialoguing and the reflecting, something my husband shared with me is that probably the first time that was ever used was Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, right? So we have these great big halachic authorities, and they're each having their rulings, and Shammai is known for his tendency to be more strict, and Hillel is known for his kind of softer approach. Normally, we follow Beis Hillel, okay? So what he shared with me was that the part of the reasoning for that was if there was a dispute, if there was a conflict between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai would say, let me explain to you why I'm right. Mm-hmm. We're in this, I'm right. But Beis Hillel, rather than saying, no, I'm right, would say, okay, so what you're saying is X, Y, and Z. Do we get that? Okay, so that makes sense. And then Beis Hillel would say whatever their perspective was, which is amazing. And because of that significant factor, it's one of the reasons we go with Beis Hillel, not because he was right more of the time, but because he could actually hear. And they engaged with each other in life. They didn't have this conflict like you're an idiot because you think it's a blue dress and you're an idiot because you think it's a gold dress. Like they went to each other's weddings and the families, right? They engaged with each other. They remained connected, even though they had very different perspectives.
Yeah. Well, why do you think it's so much harder though for couples than for friends or colleagues or other people who are going to sometimes disagree? Why is it harder when a couple disagrees?
Because you attracted your partner into your life to help you heal your childhood wounds. It's a very different dynamic. When you walk around in the world and you're looking for your beshert, right? You're going to meet lots of nice people. You're going to meet, good-looking people, less good-looking people, and there's not that chemistry, right? And then you finally meet that one person and you're like, yes, this is the one. And it's this instant chemistry. And again, it's that I feel like I've known you forever. And you spend enormous amounts of time together because they're there to help you heal. And the way that gets done is they're going to bring up all of your stuff. And they've attracted you too. So that means that could be a really, really bumpy road. Mm-hmm. And it is, unless you understand this, unless you develop these skills to help move past all the power struggle to actually see who that person is behind all of the nonsense that we all bring into our marriages and relationships. Our friends are different. We don't step on each other's toes like that. We don't assign the meanings in those relationships that we do with our really significant relationships, our intimate partners.
I feel like I could keep asking you questions. I just want to remind anyone who's on the call, if you have a question, to type it in, and we'll be happy to have Laura address it. I have two friends who've recently shared with me, like they went through a real stressful time in their life, crisis, and their focus was like on self-survival. And so they often weren't connecting with their partner on anything other than like the logistics of life, which I think is a pattern that people can fall into in this really busy, fast-paced world that we have. So what is your advice when you're working with a couple like that to actually, how do you make the time to go beyond just that? How do you make the emotional space to go beyond just that? How do you catch yourself when you're doing that so it's not like months go by and you're like, hey, we haven't even connected on anything real.
How do you do? Okay, it is such a wonderful question, because you're right, it's ubiquitous. We're so busy, and there's a certain value that we attach, not only all the truly have to things, but our society has developed a value that keeping busy is important. We are important if we're busy all the time, and so we have a tendency to add on to it. And stopping is also important. Okay, so but more directly to your question. Rituals. Rituals are things that we do whether you want to or not, right? And again, from a Jewish perspective, we got that one, right? Our lives are full of rituals. Whether we feel like it or not, this is what we do. Or this is what we don't do, depending on the law you're talking about. So here's a great ritual. Right, and again, from a Jewish, when you come in, when you enter the home, when you connect, you stop and you hug for a minimum of 8 seconds. Mm-hmm. Why? Because you want your limbic systems to sync up. So it's not one of these hug, hug, pat, pat, kiss, kiss. It's just stop and really hug and breathe. And you'll know you got it when you melt. You just kind of like melt into each other. So that's one ritual. That means I don't care how busy you think you are, unless of course you're in the middle of like a Jaffa interview and you really can't be disturbed. Get off the phone. Get off the phone. Let your partner feel that they're important. Right? Take that time, those 8 seconds. So I'm a big fan of the hug. Incorporate those hugs. Now, I think Pat Love and somebody else, they talk about hugs, and they talk about a partner each partner should initiate 3 of those a day. So that's 6 times 8. Somebody do the math. It's not a lot. We're still talking like seconds and minutes here. No matter how busy you are, you've got time for 6 8-second hugs. Okay, so that's 1. 2, gratitude and appreciation dialogues. Every night. And you can text them. Texting is also good, because then you actually have a written record, because our brain is like Teflon for the good stuff and like Velcro for the bad. And that's survival also, right? We have to be really attuned to what's going to kill us in our environment. Otherwise, we're not going to survive, right? Mm-hmm. So if it's in writing, you're going to remember it. So either gratitude, I'd like to thank you for, and each of you do 3 things and reflect it back. Because again, you want to make sure you're hearing it. I'd like to thank you for. So take turns, 3 each, do that daily, do it throughout the day in texting. If my dishwasher is empty, when I get up in the morning, I take a picture of it and I send it to my husband and I thank you, exclamation point. It can be simple stuff, right? It doesn't have to be big, huge stuff. But any way that you notice that your partner makes your life easier and better. Okay, gratitude. So 8-second hugs, gratitude, and then once a week have a crossing the bridge, right? To keep that relational space clear. Because what happens if you don't, if months go by, like you say, and you get busy with so many other things, that space just gets really polluted with everything that you're not talking about, that you're sweeping under the rug, that you're not making time for. And as with pollution, if it builds up and gets more toxic, it gets palpably hard and uninviting, and nobody wants to live there, not you and not your children. And so it then acts like a buffer, and you don't want that. So those are the three things that I would say as rituals to make sure that those months and months of not connecting don't happen.
Those are great practical takeaways. To step back for a second from all the practical skills, I'm curious if you would share with everyone kind of like, why is this the work that you're engaged in? Why work with couples? Why have this kind of practice?
Okay. So when you asked the question about, do the same things keep coming up? And I said, okay, so based on my life experience of like 60 years, like, yes, they do. So Richard Bach once said that we all teach that which we most need to learn. So I, like so many people that I've met and most of my clients, had really not such great role models for what marriage is supposed to look like, how conflict is supposed to be resolved. There was a lot of anger in my home. There was a lot of volatility in my home. And that became my adaptation. That kept me safe, right? So nobody can hurt me if I get bigger and badder first. So retraining, relearning, rethinking to get back to who I was meant to be. So I get to keep learning this all the time. I ask my clients as we're working together to write down something they're learning, relearning, or something that surprises them about themselves or their partner as we go through this process of discovery. Mm-hmm. And I, of course, do the same thing. You know, I've been doing this work for years, and I still continue to learn and to grow, and God willing, to do this better. So that's one, but also that relational space that I just talked about. We affect so many people. If your parents, grandparents, if you're a pet owner, like anybody who's very close to you lives in that relational space. And back to the beginning when I was talking about responsibility for self-regulation and owning our own stuff, unless we're owning what we put into that space, it just becomes really icky. That's a clinical word, by the way. Mm-hmm. Right? So it's not that we're 50-50 responsible for what goes into that space. We're 100% responsible each for what goes into that space to make sure that it's clean and it's loving and it's gentle. Because if what you put into that space is rightness and fear and pride and control, it's going to be hard and uninviting and ugly. If what you put in is authentic curiosity and love and patience and kindness, it's like, oh my gosh, who wouldn't want to live in that space? Mm-hmm. So I think that as a skill, since we don't teach this in school, that there is an enormous emotional legacy that you can give to your kids by showing them these things, by helping other people learn these skills. We spend times on college funds and financial planning and everything else for our children. And we all know lots of rich people who are not so very happy in life. So of all the life skills that you can give your children, it would be this. It would be seeing mommy and daddy know how to love each other, seeing mommy and daddy know how to work out conflict, to honor each other's realities and perspectives. And so it's one little corner of the world that I feel if I can kind of grow this army of love a little bit, and they go out in the world and they teach their children, and then they raise their God willing, it can become a more peaceful world when we learn how to listen to each other.
Amen. Anything else you want us to think about, take away from today? Crossing the bridge, or bigger picture than that?
I would just say there are a lot of resources that are available. So I'll just take a moment and name a few. And one of them is that the tapping solution, or EFT, emotional freedom technique, that if you use it, not only is it regulating and calming, but the main feature that I love about it is helping you get to what's really driving your dysregulation. Because you got to know that. You yourself have to know so that you can share it with your partner. So you can Google that. There is something called the Still Face Experiment on YouTube. And if you look at that, you'll get an idea of what I'm talking about those first 18 months of life, of how dysregulating it can be when that connection is lost. And then you fast forward and you ask yourself, and how is that playing out in your life now? Like, what do you do when you fear disconnection? Because you watch it happen with the infant. And it's kind of upsetting, but it's not tragic. It's okay. So I think that adds some understanding to it, because the reason I use psyched about love, it's a little play on words, because it's psych education and psyched to be excited about love, because I think it's super important to understand how we react, why we react, and that it really is normal. And that when you totally lose your mind because you've gone into your reptilian brain, that also makes sense. But because we are human beings, and because we do have those frontal lobes, we can choose to do it differently, usually by using our language brain, opening your mouth, using your words, and talking about it will bring your frontal lobes back online. So still face experiment. And I think finally, just as adding a little humor to it, there's also on YouTube a video called "It's Not About the Nail." And maybe it's because I'm a couples therapist, I don't know, but I find it absolutely hilarious. And for everyone watching, if you do view the video, I want you to watch for when she takes a breath and says, yes, is the moment she feels heard, and what it is that her partner is doing to allow her to feel that relief, because that's what you want to do with your partners. So I would just add those kind of as a supplement. They're short, they're entertaining, and yeah. And
more accessible than sitting down and reading a whole book.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, and if there are any questions either now or later, I'm really happy to give people a lot of information about this, because I think it is truly about the most important work that we do. If you get this right, you heal the world. You heal yourself and you heal the world. So.
Great. Well, thank you for doing your part to heal the world. And each of us plays a role in that, in this regard, and how we treat our partners and other people in our life. And in many regards, we all have a role in repairing the world and healing the world. So thank you for your really practical framing and the context and the scientific piece that you brought to it, and the Jewish piece, and the really wonderful takeaways. Thinking about those.
My pleasure. Thank you so
and the
much
gratitude.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to be able to put them together.
Yeah, and it's very easy to have a conversation with you. I'm sure many people you work with experience that, but just I think each of us who are on this webinar can leave with kind of the charge for a fresh start. Every time we have a conversation with a partner, it's a chance to start again and to really lead with the curiosity that you're talking about as we attempt to cross that bridge.
Yep.
So
Yep.
Thank you.